Hi, my name is Desiree Pointer-Mace. I'm the Associate Dean of the School of Education at Alverno College. This is a meeting of Alverno faculty and colleagues from the Milwaukee community. We're focused on what we can do to transform and refine our practices in serving teachers and learners and families and communities in high poverty settings. So this is largely for the purpose of some of our colleagues who couldn't be here today, but for whoever else who might be interested, welcome. Okay, so I think that we will start. I just gave a. So Angela, can you hear okay?
Yeah.
Oh dear. Let's see. It looks like we are still connected. So
okay.
Perhaps, so we'll just leave this here, and then if she comes back. Oh, there we go. Hello, hello, hello. Sorry.
No,
not a problem.
The same thing on this end.
Yeah, not a problem. So, gosh, thank you everybody so much for being so generous with your time and your colleagueship and being here on a fabulously sunny. That's nice for after the last 2 days when fall just swept in. But I think one of the reasons that I asked you all to be here today is that I've been doing a lot of thinking with some of the folks who are full-time faculty at Alverno, and then less intensively with those of you who are part-time faculty or friends, about how we can continue to grow and learn and be responsive to some of the needs in our communities. Hi,
I'm so sorry that I'm
no, we're
late.
just starting. So go ahead and
And do you think we might be able to do some introductions?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm the lucky one. I know everybody, but I just wanted to sort of set our charge. Is that over the last few years, I think probably 6 years, we've had a huge economic downturn as a country. As a city, we've long had problems of socioeconomic, segregation that also squares pretty neatly with racial segregation in our city. And then we've also, in the last couple of years, been partnering more intensively with teacher candidates who are in on-the-job teaching settings. So those might include Teach for America, but they also include the Urban Ed Fellows, and they also include potentially Head Start faculty, as well as increasing numbers of our special ed teachers who are just getting snapped up because the need is so high. So the thing that I love to do most of all when I feel like I want to learn something about something is get all of my smartest friends in the same time. So I think if we can start with Angela. Well, and speaking of buttering you up, right? Yeah, exactly. Speaking of buttering you up, there are scones that I made for you this morning. But also, Kristen brought donuts. Angela is going to be the healthiest of all of us here. But perhaps if we can go around, what I'd love for you to do is not just your name, but maybe a little bit of why you wanted to be here this morning, and also what domains of expertise you are drawing from in being here with us today. So, Angela, you and I have had to talk about this even just in the last couple of weeks when you were here in Milwaukee. But give us a sense of who you are, why you're with us today, and what domains of expertise you're drawing on.
So I am, Deborah already told you, I'm a double alum. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I'm gonna turn you up as much as I can, but we'll also listen really carefully.
Okay, so I'm a double alum of Alverno. I just recently received my PhD. So I am in the process of weighing down, so I don't need those donuts. I have a lot of weight from schooling, and so I'm in the process of dieting. So I'm glad to be here and not there. So my area of interest is in student and community empowerment. I'm particularly interested in ways in which power is distributed and shared in various communities, but particularly in education. I have a deep passion for social entrepreneurial work. Some of you may know that I started a charter school in 2004, and I ran it for 5 years when we closed in 2009. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
But I'm now trying to take on a very ambitious project and create a nonprofit structure that will not only redefine how we do schooling, but look at how we train teachers and how we connect the community in that process of really sharing power at the classroom level. So these types of conversations are important to me, not only because I'm connected to Alverno, and I'd like to see Alverno more engaged in those types of grassroots initiatives, but this is also something that I'm trying to do on the side in a very creative and ambitious way. So anything that I can learn in the process, I'm willing to do that. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And seriously, congratulations on
Yeah, fantastic.
Quite an achievement.
May I ask, I'm sorry, what charter school she started?
What charter school did you start?
Preparatory School for Global Leadership. We call it PSGL. It was on 4th and Brown.
Oh, okay.
And I have a website, so you can take a look at all of that.
Okay. Excellent.
PBSdevelopment.com.
Yeah, excellent. Great. I'll write that in the notes. Nancy.
All right, so I'm Nancy Afanasio, and I am the Dean of the School of Education here. And so my interests in this are wide and varied. One is clearly what we can learn from each other that we can infuse in our curriculum so that we are preparing our candidates to be the best that they can be and ready to serve the children in our community. I'm also working on the other end, well, not the other end of the spectrum, but I'm also working with the administrative leadership folks around the same issue. And so what's exciting to me is what I learn here, I can share with them. What I learn from them, I can share here. And so when you put those two things together, I think we have a real opportunity to make a difference in the community. And I'm also an alum from Alverno, so I'm just gonna do a little cheering for a second, because I think that we have an opportunity in this city that we're willing and able to take advantage of that other people aren't thinking about. And even other people who have urban education in their names, in their program names. I think the way we tend to go about things here is just a little bit different, and so I just really think we have an opportunity to not just think about it and talk about it or change the name of something, but to actually have that make a difference. So when people say, oh, you can tell an Alverno grad, I want this to be one of the things that they are thinking about too, that not only are they, well prepared to lead or well prepared to teach, but they're really well prepared to know and understand their students and in all that that means, and hold them to an incredibly high bar at the same time. So I draw from my experiences teaching in MPS in middle school and my work here.
Excellent. I am Kristen Bigley. I'm a recent alum last year, 2 summers ago, in the admin program here at Alverno, and just finished my reading specialist, reading teacher program. I still need to do my portfolio and take the reading test. And by day, I am a literacy coach in the Skionori School District at the middle level. Prior to that, I was a teacher in Greendale and other districts, early childhood through 2nd grade. I'm happy to hear that Head Start, working with Head Start, that was part of my early training program. The expertise that I bring to teaching at Alverno, I am in the classroom. I'm in the school setting constantly. I feel all the changes that teachers in training will soon feel or are already feeling. And I think that makes just a big difference for the coursework that we do together, that level of understanding, and making sure that they are equipped with things that they need to serve the children in the settings that they're working in and collaborate with each other. I think I've been in education since '84 in the classroom. It's changed tremendously, and the pushing and the pulling and the demands of teachers and of children in education it's just changed drastically. And I think it's critical that at the teacher training level we're really supportive and cognizant of what's going on in the schools, and that teachers are prepared to serve children in their schools. That's why I'm here. Excellent.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Charlotte Hendricks-Williams. I currently teach special education for the UEF and the TFA fellows here. I bring to the table 25 years in public education. I've retired from public education, but I've always served in very high poverty schools throughout the city of Milwaukee my entire experience has been in PS, everywhere from K4 all the way through high school, either as a para, a teacher, a special ed teacher, special ed administrator, assistant principal, or a principal. I think that one of the things that brings me to the table is not only that experience, but more recently I moved into the business world. So I work for an international firm that provides Title I services to the private schools. And that has been new for me, but I'm seeing the very same challenges in public education in the private schools in terms of meeting the needs of students who currently live in poverty. And the way that I frame my participation here is that when I was a principal at Urban Day, I've had both the UEF and the TFA fellows come to my building and serve while I was the principal, and I've seen some deficits, particularly around not only special ed and cultural diversity, but really understanding that difference with poverty and that families are different, and how do you prepare people not to bring their own biases in and to see differences and not necessarily judge those differences. So I think that's probably why I'm here, is because I see that as something that we need to figure out on how to prepare our candidates to really deal with families that come from a different social, economical, as well as cultural background.
Good morning. I'm Denise Fields. I'm the Executive Director of Alverno Learning. Head Start, we're the Head Start organization who ended up taking over SDC after SDC lost their grant. This is the second year that Alverno is in Milwaukee. First year in Racine. We expanded out to Racine and have 4 campuses there, 8 campuses here. What brings me to the table? I was excited to hear from Desiree when I met with Desiree a few weeks ago. That we could sit around the table and talk, because I'm a talker. So I definitely wanted to be at the table to discuss these issues with others. But my background also brings me to the table. I am a proud native of Milwaukee. I was born and raised here, but I left after college, and I started teaching here with MPS for a short stint before moving right into the charter world. And after a short period of time teaching middle school English, language arts here, I moved to St. Louis, and I served as an assistant principal for a year and then became principal for 3 years after that. I moved to Chicago from there and was the principal. I started as a coach, an English coach for a couple of the schools who were on probation before being asked to take on an interim director role for the Young Women's Leadership Charter School of Chicago, which is the only all-girls public school. It's a leadership school there. After 6 months of interim, I became the principal there and did that for 4 years and enjoyed every bit of it. So any connection with Alverno that I can make now that I'm back home, that all women's population is very intriguing to me. After having served as a principal of kindergarten through 12th grade between St. Louis and Chicago, I remember vividly the day I sat at my desk last year and said, it's so disheartening to continue to watch how far behind the students are, even when they're coming into 7th grade. We have a challenge before us, as any middle and high school teacher or principal would have if students don't have a strong foundation. And although I had never taught Head Start, after teaching middle school and serving as a principal in middle and high school, I said this will continue. We will continue to sit around the table and talk about the achievement gap and how big it is until we really get to the root of it, and that's the foundation. So when this opportunity found me, I happily accepted. I was excited to come back home, but more importantly, excited to work with former students who now have Head Start aged children. So to have parents who understand the type of teacher I was and can help support them being new parents, that's really exciting for me. So I definitely am excited about being around the table and hopefully connecting with each of you here today. Thank you.
Gosh, with all of that experience coming around,
I know.
It's like, wow, what do
I did not oversell it.
Well, for those of you,
Good morning, Jessica.
My name is Pamela Lucas, and I am a professor here at Alverno. And I come to Alverno with 30 years of experience in Milwaukee Public Schools. And throughout those years, don't sit there.
Yeah.
Don't
She can sit
Oh,
here.
yeah.
You
Oh,
can
yeah,
sit here,
sorry.
we have someone.
Angela is right
Oh.
there.
Oh my gosh, right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and we've got a Google Hangout going there. Actually, can you sit next to Nancy? Yeah. That would be.
Hi, Jessica.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And throughout my 30 years of experience, I've worked with a range of students. But as I look back on my significant experience, I think my significant experience actually is shared with Angela at Grand Avenue Charter School, where we started out with 45 students, and the program grew. Needless to say, we closed too, but it wasn't our choice. It was someone else's. And during that time, I had my entire range of experience. I've worked with students from basically impoverished backgrounds. And some were smart, some were a little slower, some were slower still. But they were all a joy to work with. So what brings me here is my interest still in helping Alverno find its way to meet the needs of all of those students, regardless. But in particular, with working with the TFA students, they work with students who are surrounded by, swamped by poverty and the issues that they bring. So anything that starts here, I can learn and hopefully help make their experience less stressful by providing them with a few strategies that will help them learn how to work with students who are different than they are. So I think that's, thank you guys.
Can I just add one thing to that, Pam, because I want to just clarify when I said earlier that, I was cheerleading for Alverno, and saying I think we're in a really good place to have this conversation. I think what you just said is the reason why I believe that. So I don't want to be disparaging about our other institutions because I work very, very closely with all of the deans of education in the 8 other institutions in the city, and we're all, working on this. One of the reasons I think we're well suited is because we are small, and so that means we're agile. So we can talk something today, and Pam and Kristen and Jonathan can take it next time they teach and do something with it, in ways that some of the larger places don't have that ability to do so. There's more of a, hierarchy in place in terms of how to make those decisions. So I just wanted to, I didn't want to be disparaging about any other institution because again, we're all working on this, but so it's that agility piece I think that is
In the relationship, to be able to teach like TFA, to have them for 3 classes. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, sorry.
My name is Amy Nelson Christensen. I am actually very honored to be here. I'm a bit humbled, don't know why I was invited, but thank you. I'm actually not a Wisconsin native. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I moved here to go to graduate school at UWM, and I got my PhD in urban ed with a specialization in school psychology at UWM. I'm sorry.
Social psychology.
Yes. I went to school with Jessica.
Yeah.
We actually did some great things when we went to school together at UWM. But I'm a very proud employee of Milwaukee Public Schools. I've been working for Milwaukee Public Schools now for 6 years. I currently work in the violence prevention program, which I know Nancy's name very well because we're responsible for the bullying prevention training that we do in the district as well as socio-emotional learning. But my role when I was added to the team last year was focused on trauma-sensitive schools and how do we support trained teachers to understand how traumatic experiences influence learning and influence how students function in the classroom. Prior to that, I was working in alternative high school for 4 years. That was very hard for me to leave because I had grown very attached to the students that I had worked with and the teachers that I had worked with. And I learned firsthand about how these negative school experiences over time with teachers who aren't very sensitive to what our students need outside of instruction can impact them to the point where later on down the road they're at the risk of dropping out or have dropped out and now want to come back to school. I completed my dissertation on racial identity and how racial identity impacts affective and behavioral school engagement. And again, I was inspired by that from my students that I had worked with at the alternative high school. And so my research interest and just my general context that I'm operating from is the impact of stereotypes the impact of the danger of that single story, of how do we reinforce negative stereotypes with students, and again, thinking about when we're, as adults working with children, how are we reinforcing stereotypes and how are we breaking those stereotypes?
You sound like me 40 years ago.
I do sound like the young, again, I don't know why I was invited, I feel like the youngest in the room, like I have so much to learn right now.
I'm so happy to hear
I
that.
think you got from the youngest in the room to the oldest in the room. I'm Pat Lukey. I am the director of the Special Education Teacher Preparation Program here, a role that I love and kind of fell into. I retired after 40 years in public education, and it's interesting trying to crystallize where I'm coming from. Is kind of interesting, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My entire career was spent in the Milwaukee Public Schools and the Wauwatosa Public Schools. And when I went to Wauwatosa back in 1980, it was as the principal of the school at the Milwaukee County Child and Adolescent Treatment Center, which is a private psychiatric hospital for kids ages 3 to 18. I was an English teacher, went back and got a master's degree in special education with an emphasis on emotionally disturbed adolescents. And then I worked in private psychiatric hospitals before I went to CATC. I consider myself a city girl, and because I remember when I went to Wauwatosa, I was very clear on the fact that there was no residency requirement because we're never going to find me living there. So 5 years later, we moved to Wauwatosa after we have the other piece of this is not just professional, it's personal. We have 4 children, 3 of whom were adopted, and we adopted them when they were 5, 7, and 9. And they came from out of town in separate foster homes after multiple foster placements. So we did a lot of work as parents about reactive attachment disorder and some of the things that kids are going through. I have a great interest in trauma-sensitive schools and the work being done around that. So in Wauwatosa, I went from CATC. I've gone back and forth between general ed and regular ed. I was an assistant principal. I was the director of pupil services and special ed for about 20 years, and then before I retired, went back to the building. And my good friend Dawn Buchetti is your principal. And then right before I left, I went back to my old roots on the county ground and worked as the administrator with shelter care and at the juvenile detention center. So I've spent much of my career working with emotionally disturbed adolescents in my heart, even though that may not have been my role. The other strand that I do, and I went back after my daughter went to college and finished my PhD, and I just got it a year ago in urban ed at UWM. And probably graduated.
Amazing. I thought it makes other people
Yeah. And my emphasis there is on leadership. And so right now I'm also looking at how do we prepare leaders to work with all kids. Probably the other thing other than trauma-sensitive schools is this little niche is I'm just captivated with Carol Dweck's work on mindset and how mindset affects all that we do with kids, with families. I just got an article I shared yesterday about attitude and mindset and beliefs about teachers on the academic achievement of kids with disabilities. The same thing is true of kids from poverty, kids of color, any kids who don't speak English as their first language. And that is also influenced by some of the early learning of my own kids who lived in multiple foster homes before we adopted them. And so I saw some of those disruptions. I had this, although I've never ever worked in early childhood, I have a real interest in, I think, seeing with my own 4 children how the differences in their early life experiences affected and what kinds of gaps that some of the kids came with. I just have a tremendous respect and urge to provide early childhood education universally from, I think it's critical. So sorry I was a little wordy.
That's awesome. I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
I'm kind of like Amy, feeling like my autobiography is a little shorter.
Yeah.
So I'm Aubrey Vogel, and I am here as the Director of Initial Licensure for General Education, so I'm the other half of the student role. I think Angela and I finished our dissertation work within weeks of one another, and I only know that because Mary Dietz was kind of assisting both of us, and I hear, I just got off with Angela, and now let's do yours. So Yes, I'm pretty fresh off of my dissertation work, which was around problem-based learning for teacher education, and how that helps teachers think differently about what their role is and what's possible or not possible within the classroom. And I guess my direct interest, joining that, which is a strong interest of mine, and this is thinking about the types of problem scenarios that could be posed when presenting a problem scenario to teacher candidates. Right now, ED 116, which is like the very, very first course that anybody interested in education would take here, they are engaged throughout the semester in problem-based learning curriculum. And the problem changes every semester. And I have really begun thinking about how could the problem be stated in such a way to get them thinking about deeper issues around serving. It's already around serving diverse students, but around more of a focus on socioeconomically diverse students. There's also sort of a requirement in the course to talk about Native American students. So it's always an interesting mix of like how to make a problem statement that's going to also hit all of the requirements of the course.
Of the statutes.
But it can be done. So that's an interest of mine. And personally, my son is 2, and he is at a school that's trying to achieve charter status and is looking to partner up with Head Start as well. So I've been involved in a lot of conversations there around just kind of in a think tank there too, on a very informal basis right now. And it's interesting for me to think about where they're headed and why they want to expand their program and what kinds of considerations need to be made. So I've got that, but I'm also double alum of Alverno. My heart has always been here. I am born and raised in Milwaukee as well. BD grad. Right here. So that's excellent.
Oh, we got Angela's little puppy.
Awesome. I didn't know we could bring our dogs.
Wait a minute. We can Skype Rocco in.
All right. Yeah. It's not so little.
Right. So, just to give you a sense of my background, I know I welcomed everybody, but I'm Desiree Mason. I'm the Associate Dean of the School of Education here. This is my 8th year at Alverno. I came here from California. And I taught in Oakland Unified School District there and San Francisco Unified School Districts, which are big, complicated, high poverty, high diversity places to teach. So while I am not a native of Milwaukee, I feel like these problems, like Pat so eloquently stated, have been in my heart for a really long time. And also, I think this particular summer was, I entered teaching through Teach for America, so that also has a part of my heart and commitment, and I want to do a really good job with them, not just for the candidates themselves, but for the children and populations that they have an opportunity to serve. Related to that work, I was in 6 different schools this week that have nothing in common but the poverty level of their students. Different in terms of, and how incredibly segregated they are racially. Because I saw 3 different ethnic groups, but they don't see each other ever. And that's very interesting for us to think about as well, because this is an interesting time. I think although this meeting request predated the events of Ferguson, I see them as very much related to problems of equity and justice and disproportionate incarceration and all of these kinds of things that just make me so angry. And when I get angry, I want to get active. So, when I think about all these precious babies from, ages 1st grade to bigger than I am 8th graders this week, I really think of them as, they're just one step removed from my own children, and I want them to have wonderful life outcomes like all children should have. This summer, I also had a chance to live and work in Argentina, where I was doing a lot of work with teachers and school leaders and teacher education programs there. And poverty is at a really different scale in parts of Argentina. People are living in homes of their own construction, in big neighborhoods that are called villas, where water is taken off, like from rain barrels, and electricity is stolen off the grid. And those children bring all kinds of interesting problems to schools, and I got a chance to work with their teachers to think about that. And so part of me was thinking, man, well, we've got electricity and running water in most places in Milwaukee. Like there are some things where
we also want to build from how much we have here and how it's really an opportunity for us to treat our communities with this asset perspective, and also, like I said, it's really high standards.
Okay, I'm Jessica Brum-Larson. I apologize for being late. I am an assistant professor in the psychology department here, and my degree is similar to Amy's, although it's in educational psychology. I started in urban ed, and then they switched it over, and I made the choice to go to ed psych, and with a school psych specialty. My interest has been, I've done a lot of work in the schools, but I've been very focused, I think, on like mental health issues for kids, and that was always sort of the plan in the back of my mind, was that eventually I was going to get into schools and hopefully even start like mental health clinics or be a part of more of that aspect. But I'm working right now in obviously the psych department here, and and then I also coordinate our internship program for our graduate level counseling students. So it's a good mix, but I think there's always that piece of me that just misses a lot of that direct service and misses being in the schools and stuff. So I think I was also very honored to be asked to be here and just really excited to kind of connect with people and feel like I could still be a part of, Christina, be a part in some way of knowing what's going on in the community and being connected to that. So a little bit of my experience, I worked mostly just thinking about my practicum experience here in Milwaukee. I was in MPS in Allen Field for a year. I worked with the Marquette Behavioral Health Clinics doing in-home treatment for little babies and toddlers. And then I did a year at Boys Town for my predoctoral internship. So that's right around Omaha, Nebraska, a residential treatment facility there. So a lot of kids just with a lot of complex issues. And then now I'm a licensed counselor. I do private practice 1 day a week, and I am a school psychologist still, state certified, but I haven't done that in a little while, so, but we'll see. And I think that's enough about my background, but yeah, I just am really excited to kind of, like I said, learn and see what's going on in the community. Oh, I also did work with SDC Head Start for 4 years with doing research on early literacy when I was at UWM. And then, so I have this kind of mixed interest. I've always really been interested in adolescence, and that was always my focus. But then when I got into school psych, so much of it was focused on early prevention and intervention, that I got a lot of training there. And then once I had my son, who's also 2, I got so fascinated with just like the early prevention and in terms of just how we can, I just remember my stress level and my adjustment was difficult. And I thought, for people who don't have a job, who don't have money, all of these things, don't have supports. I have a partner too who's there to help and everything. So it's like, for people who don't have that, imagine the stress they're under and imagine how that impacts their infants and their toddlers and their young children who give you some very interesting behaviors. So now I have sort of this, so I feel like in some ways I'm just feeling my way out in terms of where my interests lie, but yeah, I'm definitely just interested in kids. And
that's an interesting piece when you're thinking about like, having your own and what that means and all that changes. I had to wrap my brain around that as a new middle school teacher, because I had middle school students who were pregnant when I was, and I'm like, you're 12, and I'm freaking out and I have a job and a partner and, all this kind of stuff. And so that's always been in my mind as well, that if they stay in school, they'll be in MPS when their kids are, and it's just like, that's a whole different thought process, because I know a lot about brain development too, and they're not there, you know what I mean? So it's just like, it's just a interesting issue to be thinking about and what that means for their children, what it means for their own learning, what it means for the community that they're in. It's just so.
Well, and so as you saw, we have our colleague Christina Garza-Nelson and her lovely assistant Christian, who's going to be out there in the hallway. She's getting him settled. And Christina is here as the director of our Community Leadership and Development Program. She brings a lot of really interesting expertise that I'll have to tell you about in a minute. But if we can maybe open it up to like, what did you just hear? Like, I mean, I got a chance to meet you all before today. And so I think, what are some of your thoughts?
I'm so super excited. I can't even tell you. I know some of these folks, and some better than others, and And I am just so thrilled with everybody that it has come to the table. I think we have so much experience in this room, it's ridiculous. And I think the way we can draw on each other and from each other is going to be powerful. I don't know what it's going to ultimately look like or what it's going to be like, but I'm excited. I'm excited for possibilities that I can't even wrap my brain around just yet.
Yeah. What thoughts? What do you hear?
I'm in awe of all the expertise around the table and the opportunities just to learn from everyone.
Well, I think one of the things that I think I said in my email, but I really want to underscore is that I did not bring you here with any kind of directive agenda, right? I mainly just, the only thing that I ask people to bring is basically something that we can talk about, something that pushes our thinking, because I know we can cover a whole lot more terrain together than we can individually. I also see so much potential, but I really want to be clear that I'm not giving anybody any, action items after today. But I think the only outcome I would hope that we could identify after today is basically when's the next time that we get together. Because I just think having a chance to have a really cross-pollinated set of colleagues, and I don't know, I don't always have meetings that I really look forward to. I was really looking forward to it. And so that's the other thing.
You mean outside of the school event?
Yes. I'm just saying. One of my goals for this year is to help build meetings that people really want to come to. And that we feel like we're going to be heard, and we feel like we're going to have a chance to share things and ask things and have it be a really safe space. I think that we all have had, I'm sure, lots of positive and less than positive interactions with lots of people that probably other people in this circle know. So I think that our communication task force principles always carry with us. And those of you who've been advised by Mary Dietz know that they were at the end of her email signature. But the first one of those is presumed positive intent. And so, I think that and making space for a plurality of views on these things. My friend, I'm sorry you're here.
I apologize.
No, not necessary. But he's all settled and
he's good now. We're plugged in for a little while.
Good.
For a little bit.
Excellent. Well, so while you are settling in and getting a good level of blood sugar and caffeine going, do you want to just tell folks briefly what we did? And I took notes. I'll share with you kind of the other folks who are here. But if you want to just set a little context for who you are, what work you do here, and what work you've done kind of on your journey that is why you're here this morning.
Sure. Well, I'm Christina, and I'm the director of our Community Leadership and Development major. And if you're not familiar with that major, it prepares students for working in the sector, service sector, housing, government, pretty much you can just about anything with community leadership and development major. It's interdisciplinary, so it draws on business, social sciences. Several students will add an adult education support or minor to that. Communication, it's very, very blended, and then community development theory behind it.
So, did you guys meet before? Did you go with me most recently to Head Start? Okay, I know. Okay, so Christina, I talked about Christina with you. So Christina is the director of our Community Leadership and Development. Denise is the new director of Acelero.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. It's a nicely placed right next to each other. Because once we build that, the Acelero faculty will likely be CLD majors once they get to know.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I mentioned that you can do anything with CLD.
Yeah,
My background, let's see. Communication from UW Whitewater, and I worked at UW Whitewater for about 10 years directing their Upward Bound program. Yeah, pre-college programs. Federally funded TRIO program. I also developed, worked on the curriculum. I lived with the kids all summer long, 6 weeks. every summer. I probably had more fun than the kids actually. That's you're laughing, but I probably had more fun than the kids. We took a national field trip every summer at the end of the program, and the reason that I finally moved on was my first two were 16 or 2 and 3. There's that age now. They were 2 and 3, and it was so hard. Like what I'm doing this morning is what I did every day. I was having flashbacks. Oh my gosh, not this again. But yeah, like Karina and Nathan had to live in the dorms with me, and I'd often have to grab a student to watch them so I could go do my work. Oh, it was fun. It was challenging. Not going to do it again though. And then Roger Pulliam encouraged me to move forward and pursue my PhD. That's Urban Education and Multicultural Studies. We live in Milwaukee. Got to write my dissertation, but that's the plan for the next year. I'm really with you, so.
Hey, excellent, good. Dissertation support group.
Together, like to like write. Yeah. We'll have Desiree be the whip.
Yes. I am not violent, but I'm good at encouraging.
Yeah, that's all I need at the deadline.
Yeah.
And I will be doing that on teaching community leadership and development. Let's see. I am Mexican American, so I'm Chicana. I actually just found out this summer that my great grandfather, it was Kickapoo, Algonquin Kickapoo, and they actually settled in what we look at as Mexico, right in the northern part of the country. So I have this whole undiscovered thing yet that I'm just, that'll happen after the dissertation.
More self-discovery come after.
Yeah, right, got it.
But anyway, so I was at UW Milwaukee, got into a few programs, became a Holmes Scholar, which is that's a national program to help graduate students in education of color to actually make it, get through and matriculate. So I had that opportunity, and because of that opportunity, I became the chief executive officer of their alumni association. So I was part of starting that nonprofit while I was a graduate student of the DOC program. So I worked with Wanda Blanchett and Dean Thurman, and we started the National Association of Home Scholars Alumni. And then I kind of got pulled over to the Roberto Hernandez Center. While I was at the Roberto Hernandez Center, I helped them start the Latino Nonprofit Leadership Program. And we did the first year with Jeanette Mitchell. And then after that, it was all but dissertation, and then all of a sudden this job came up.
Lucky us.
Yeah. So I said, well, go for it. It's everything that I've done and I'm doing, and let's go for it. And I got the job, so that's why the dissertation's been on. But fantastic. It's just been a perfect fit. It's been fantastic. You see him pacing back there?
I'm sure you have eyes in the back of
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what my over.
Yeah.
Questions?
No, you and I have two things in common. Obviously, you were directing Upward Bound. I was a student in Upward Bound, and I was also.
Oh, yes! Wow. We're related.
Yes. Are you also Kickapoo Algonquin?
No, I know as far as I know. No,
Really?
Yeah.
It took me 44 years to find this one out, so you never know.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and not that this makes you feel any better, but UW gives you 10 years to finish your your doctoral degree, and I took 9 because I got married and bought a house and had a baby in that time. So I worked on my dissertation for 4 years, so you should be, if you do it in a year, that's actually very impressive.
And you've got some people here to keep on you.
Absolutely.
I
totally
made the
understand.
shift here the same year I finished, so I've told her it can be done.
Yeah.
And I know where her office is.
Yeah, this job completely stalled mine as well. Because once you're here, you gotta get in and get settled and get figured, and you just can't, at least I couldn't divide my head in that way early on. So it took me a long time to finish my
Well, it's good to hear that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
Not uncommon.
But it can be done.
Yeah, and my position isn't even just as an assistant professor, I'm also the director of community leadership, so I've got that job.
Oh, there was a third thing. My cousin graduated from your program, and her name is Denise.
You're related to everyone. I am not surprised that there are points of connection. So actually, Angela, since I want to make sure, I know that sometimes when people are stepping in, it can be challenging to actively participate. So I'll every so often just like throw it over to you. What are you hearing? What are you excited about?
Well, it's interesting because as an educator, I've had a really difficult time merging my background as a social scientist. So my undergrad degree is secondary ed, but it's also social science. So as a sociologist, I look at these conversations and I say, I ask a couple of questions. Who's at the table? Who's not at the table? And what are they saying? So of course there's a whole conversation in my head that's happening while you all are talking. But the one thing that I did want to say is that a lot of times in movements for the people, we do it for the people and not with the people. And I just need to, as we're giving our credentials and our background, I need to say, and I'm not saying I'm the only one at the table that represents this community, but I need to put it at the table as a credential that I am actually of the community. So when we talk about low socioeconomic backgrounds, I grew up with a single parent who was a survivor of domestic violence. My grandfather was known as the town drunk. Really growing up, really struggling in education and schooling myself, barely graduating. So when we think about the students that we serve, a lot of times I identify with that personally, and I also bring that to the conversation in addition with my credentials and my experiences. And I know other people have had similar experiences, but I want to encourage us to make sure that we give voice to that, because I think that is as significant as what we've been taught. I think our personal narrative is important, so I just wanted to say that.
Angela, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm really glad you said that because I was thinking the same thing. I grew up in the 53204 zip code, which now is known for Mexican restaurants on 5th and National. But I went to schools that were bilingual long before it was predominant. And I think the difference for us is that I don't think anybody knew that we weren't being raised in a upper middle class kind of a community. I think that it was very coherent and very small, but it was poor, and I was the first person in our family to graduate from college. And I think some of that's generational. My mom was a person who actually had a teacher volunteer to pay for her college tuition, and her mom wouldn't let her. Her mom was in a wheelchair, and her dad had died when she was 9 years old, and from family circumstances, she wasn't able to pursue education, and she was bound and determined that her daughters were going to. So it's very interesting, because when I look at where I live now, and actually when we adopted the kids, I wondered whether or not moving to Wauwatosa was even a good move, because it was so homogeneous, and we really struggled long and hard before we did that. So it's certainly not of the same intensity that I see with a lot of kids today, but I know what you're talking about, and I'm really glad you mentioned it.
I too am glad you mentioned it, Angela, because I always say, when I moved away from Milwaukee 8 years ago, I wasn't one of those people who said, when I'm of age, I'm leaving Milwaukee. Like, people rush to leave home. I left for opportunity and advancement. And to be in St. Louis as an educator, I still had to learn so much about St. Louis and understand the city and people I was working with. And then the same with Chicago. To enter Chicago in such a huge city, political stuff within education, being a principal of the only all-girls public school, I mean, being the face all the time, trying to defend, single-sex education, all of that. But to come back home for me, I don't know how to even describe it. Sometimes when you move back home, after a couple weeks, you ask yourself, why did I come back home? And that's not me. Every day, I've been here now since July 19th, officially. And every day I cannot believe I'm back home, but with excitement, because when I say I'm coming back to serve my community, I'm back to serve my community. I'm on the radio. We have our commercial out on 98.3 and B100. And when I start off, I say, "Hey, Milwaukee." When I say that, I feel like I'm talking to people I know, and to get responses, whether it's on Facebook or emails or text messages saying, "Hey, I just heard your commercial. My daughter needs a school." I mean, that to me is just major. When I'm at church and my pastor allows me to speak on behalf of Acelero, and to know that people who were either my teacher at one point or or still know my parents, I'm back home. It's so much more meaningful to me to do this work back at home. So I always say I'm a city girl too, and I'm a proud native of Milwaukee. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. So I know that I asked you guys to bring things that you like to, that you've read or that push your thinking in good ways. What do we think would be a good way to get into that? I mean, this is kind of a big group, so if we keep going around, we keep going around. But we could also split up the tables and then move around. Or what do people feel like doing? I kind of feel like moving and mixing it up might be nice. But then I can move Angela. She needs to be in.
I really would like to hear about what everyone's bought.
Yeah. Okay.
So
maybe why don't we talk about maybe a brief bit of what we brought, and then we can see if there are any sort of natural clusters where we should maybe match up these ideas. So I
Excuse me, before you get started.
Oh wait.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
Okay. Did you ask the question if we want to break up in smaller groups or stay in a large group? Was that the question you asked?
That was the question. Then Shondaland said that she wanted to hear everybody's, at least at the beginning.
Okay, and I just want to be the voice that I think a large group like this, it's very difficult to have a fluent conversation. So I would go to break it up in smaller groups and then reconvene. But I'm flexible. I just wanted to.
Yeah. Well, so I think that we can maybe do both of those things. So we can sort of share briefly what we kind of thought about, and then maybe carve ourselves up into different groups and talk a little bit more. Pam.
I just need to say to the group, I'm so sorry that I can't stay. I'm getting ready to leave. I think now is an opportune time.
Yeah.
But please keep me involved in the conversation. I do have somewhere else I have to be.
That's why I'm so
Otherwise, I would not have come this morning because I woke up going, I got somewhere else to be at 8:30 in the morning. On a Saturday.
Yeah. It's a big ask, but thank you so much for coming. We'll love to see you at the next one. Okay, so one of the things that I did this summer is that I did a brief book review for Teachers College Press, and they either pay you $75 or they pay you in books. So I basically said, oh, I'd like to be paid in books, and so they gave me, I went through and I just did a search for poverty and requested every single book that Teachers College Press had, and so I got a whole bunch.
There's way more than that.
And then I distributed them to some of my friends on the hallway. But one in particular was by Deborah Meyer and some of her colleagues. And Deborah Meyer is it's the Harlem Children's School, was one of her first schools, and then she did the Mission Hill School in Boston. And she's one of my big heroes just in life, and in terms of having incredible outcomes without necessarily just getting them by teaching to the test. So one of them was about basically playground talk at Mission Hill and looking at how kids enact peer relationships with each other. And really just interesting. I'm interested in young kids a lot of times. That's my expertise as an elementary school teacher, and so looking at that was pretty cool. Another one that I read is called Pedagogy of the Poor, Building a Movement to End Poverty. This is co-written by Willie Baptist, who has a long history as a leader in California. He was a union guy and a dock worker and a Black Panther and a leader in the Watts Uprisings, and just has had a really interesting life story. So half of this is basically kind of him talking about his life and various movements to empower people that he's been involved in. John Riemann, who's the other co-author, is on the faculty of Union Theological Seminary. So he brings a kind of faith perspective on justice and empowerment and the two of them are co-taught a course that this is drawn from. And so some of it is, there are some pieces where it's sort of like, I didn't really need to see their, their grad students' entire perception, from their course management software, because I was like, I get a chance, luckily for me, to have those kinds of conversations with teachers. However, the parts particularly from going back to this life and experience and kind of looking at like how they've worked on a poverty initiative was pretty interesting to me. And I think very much speaks to Angela's point about how you get people at the table so that it's not like sort of helping at people. Because that I think is something that I get very much agree with. Why don't we go this way now?
Well, you know what? I came actually hoping to harvest book ideas because I was all immersed in Russian philosophy for way too long as I finished my dissertation, and then turned to things like Goodnight Moon and if you give a dog a donut, so sort of unwind. So I came sort of a blank slate and hoping to get a nice list, and now I actually have something to take home. Cool.
I just picked up a couple of articles that I had read, and one of the things that struck me, they're all about a little more of a focus about preparing teachers for high poverty schools. The thing that struck me about them is they're all about 10 years old, which tells me a couple of things. Number one, this isn't something new. How long it takes for us to come around to really doing something. And I haven't had time to do much of a search to find more up-to-date materials, but these are more really geared towards, this is one about a professional development school that looks to close 2 gaps at one time. The achievement gap for economically disadvantaged students and a program gap for those who teach them. So that was kind of the focus of my reading, was more than, although I love to read the big picture stuff. I particularly like to read or listen to Pedro Noguera most of the time, and would love to do a little bit more reading on him. And I see you have a Paul Gorski book, and he's the guy out in Minnesota, isn't he? Is he like at McAllister somewhere? I like him a lot too. So there's just a lot of stuff. SKI, yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder. I just happened to notice that book, and I thought, I've done his website and a lot of his presentation stuff, but I haven't seen the book, so I'm looking forward to reading that.
Okay. Great, good. So I brought a couple research articles, but what I wanted to do was bring my Pedagogy of Freedom by Freire. I am a Freire.
Yes.
And again, I teach TLA 611. This is my first semester teaching it. And I had a student who said Freire and Ruby Payne in the same sentence.
Oh no.
And I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to bite her head off as the instructor, but I was like, oh no, that you don't put those two in the same sentence. But I really do think that one of the things that myself, Angela, you brought up a really good point about who is not at the table. I grew up with 2 deaf parents, and I was always reminded of how I was different as a child. As a child, I had to interpret for my parents at parent-teacher conferences, and so I would be the one who would get the information, and I'd say, I'll tell you later, Mom. So knowing what it was like to have 2 different environments, a different home environment from a different school environment, when I came across Ruby Payne the first time I entered MPS, or I was actually a practicum student when I learned about it, how much we as a framework, everything is based on the perspective of people outside of that group, and so how we look at poverty based as outsiders. And so I brought this article today from Gloria Ladson-Billings. It's not the culture of poverty, it's the poverty of culture and the problem with teacher education. And so this is a really fantastic article. That she normally doesn't write a lot about poverty. Gloria Ladson-Billings writes a lot about critical race theory, and so I really appreciate what she talks about, but I thought this article was really interesting in terms of how are we training pre-service teachers to think about culture? Because a lot of times, again, especially when we know as a school psychologist, the majority of us are from white middle class, female, and so I think a lot of the models and the frameworks that are developed are for people of that perspective. But again, she has some really great points and some interviews that she talks about with students who didn't understand their own culture, and then when they identified differences, it was a cultural difference. It wasn't just, because they didn't understand it, it was a cultural difference. And so I think this will be a really good kind of conversation to have around this article.
So and similar to that, Carl Grant's work, who's a colleague of
yes, from Madison.
Yeah, has a lot around that. So that's sort of more of his little niche. And so anything that
I had the opportunity to hear him speak a few weeks ago at an Institute for Urban Ed. Oh my goodness, he is a great speaker. Like I could just listen to him talk.
He's a good storyteller.
Yes, yes.
Great. Well, I went a different route. I didn't necessarily choose a book that you probably would have seen in any urban education program, but there's an author that I had the pleasure of meeting and doing some work with in St. Louis named William Jenkins. And William Jenkins, he pushes the envelope big time with African Americans and Caucasian teachers alike. And one of his books, the one I brought with me, is called The Good Book, and talks about values plus commitment equals character. And when we avoid talking about some of the real reasons behind the achievement gap in urban education with African American children, we end up again talking in circles just about some of the same issues. But and this one just points out the 20 cherished values of the American people, and said if students who grow up in impoverished homes or families or experiences had these 20 things and understood them, like respect for the rights of others, respect for others' property, family, respect for the elderly, life and human dignity. I mean, some of the things that many of us automatically know, or depending on what your background or your upbringing was, but these are some of the things that African American children in particular, in my experience, don't have and don't value, and that's what gets in the way. But the one that he really, really pushes the envelope on is called The Real Reasons Behind the Achievement Gap. And he has a quote on the front that can really, really bother people if you're not careful. And I'll try to quote, but it's something like, either black children are intellectually inferior, or their parents, teachers, and everyone responsible for their education is doing it all wrong. So if you see something like that on the front of a book, you want to open it and say, what are you talking about? You don't know if you should be offended as an African American person. You don't know if you should be offended as if you're not African American and you're teaching African American children. So I keep a lot of his books on hand because, truth be told, when you go into it, it really does talk about things that as parents, what you have to be able to acknowledge, and you can't go to the table or come to the table for parent-teacher conference and blame the teacher for what your child isn't doing, and you have to be able to discipline your child early so that you don't have those types of conversations at the table. So that's one that I just kind of keep close to me when I'm having conversations or doing professional developments around how to deal with children in urban schools. And then the other, I'm really big on leadership. I didn't bring any of my Maxwell books, but those of you who are, you probably have every one too, right? Like every John Maxwell book, he's just a phenomenal leader. But lastly, I started our company, like all of our employees got together. We had our kickoff or relaunch of Acelero this year on the 18th at the Pilot House, right over the lake downtown. And I wanted us to focus on 212. And I don't know how many of you are familiar, but 212 degrees, the extra degree. 212 is the boiling point of water. And so we're starting and staying focused on this as our theme, just basically saying 210 degrees is not enough, 211 is not enough. We have to go the extra degree in serving the children that we serve in urban ed. And I think this is to keep this mindset when you're working with children in poverty. You'll always go the extra degree. Like what you may do under normal circumstances with your own children, maybe 210, but when you're entering a classroom and you're working with children who have so many needs and they don't have what you give yours at home, it'll make you go that extra degree. It'll make you show up on a Saturday morning, not just at an event like this, but at school to work with some of the students in challenging areas. One thing I always remember about TFA is my first year as an assistant principal in Chicago, in St. Louis. We had a Teach for America student, young Caucasian girl named Katie Kloon. And Katie cried every day probably until the maybe last month of school. By the last month, she had those children doing anything she needed them to do. But from that point on, she gave extra. Every Saturday was called Saturday Adventure, and she would have 2 or 3 of her most challenging students with her. Every week she just changed it up, and that's what started to change them. And when I say coming in on Saturdays, they met at the school, but they went to the library and then the park, the library and then the museum, the library and then, somewhere fun, after 3 Saturdays straight. But it was that, to me, that was example of 212 degrees going extra. And she's a TFA administrator now in Chicago, just giving that same advice, to other TFA board members. So
that must be a common TFA. I'm a TFA mom.
Okay.
My youngest was TFA. And
so you've gone to the schools too and helped?
Well, she was in Kansas City, and actually we did that there. Then she came back here and taught for a couple of years. But we went through the nightly phone calls with tears, almost the whole first semester. And it seems to be a common thread among, and one of her friends, the same thing. It was a very intense, eye-opening experience. Yeah. And she had a better insight into what was going to happen than a lot of kids, because both of her parents are educators, and we kind of help school her on what was coming, but I don't think it ever prepared her for what she faced.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Kim Droder, I'm sorry, I'm saying the names like you know, but Kim Droder was another TFA teacher who just cried into her second week, and I stopped her in the hall and looked her eye to eye. Well, she was taller than me, so.
Yeah.
I said, Droder, are you kidding? I said, it's week 2. You're supposed to cry right now. You're supposed to be confused and overwhelmed right now. And all of 8, 9 years later, when I put out on Facebook that Solero was looking for certified teachers in early childhood, she was the first person to respond and said, I wish I could come back and work for you. That first response to what she was overwhelmed with stuck with her forever. It's okay.
And the other thing I think is related to our conversation is that it's interesting because none of that frustration was around academics. It was all around behavior.
Exactly.
It was all around, and it was all around, I'm not prepared to deal for what I'm seeing from the students from a behavioral perspective, from previous experiences in school. And the other part was, for her, was dealing with the system, which was very large. She's now a dean of students this year, first time at a charter school in Brooklyn. So that's a whole other challenge where she's really focusing, and her focus is on helping new teachers work with kids' behavioral issues in the classroom, including some TFAs that are on their staff. But it was probably, she thought, the biggest problem that she had with TFA training was they just didn't prepare you. There was an underlying belief that all you have to do, if you teach really well, you won't see the behavior. Now, if you teach really well, you'll see less of the behavior. I think that's true, but I don't think she was at all prepared for what she was going to see.
I think what you both are highlighting, but I think is an opportunity for all of us, is thinking about how do we build resilient teachers.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And how do we build people who are who feel like, and especially when you think about the system.
Yes.
Because of course, and we go to particular people because it's just like an instant connection. But having seen 9 different TFAs this week in their second year, so they're much better than they were in their first year, but the population search, you still need them just as much. And thinking about one in particular where she just is perennially disheartened, and with good reason, actually, because the school had, I think, 30% of its faculty come back this year.
Yep.
They've had 4 principals in the last 2.5 years.
Yep.
The kids actually aren't turning over as much.
No.
So that's kind of interesting because it speaks to the hope, I think, that the families are having. But they really have so many needs, and there's not yet, to the extent that this teacher needs it,
basically a visible system of support for our kids.
That's huge.
And it's the realistic conversations that have to take place prior to and then right after week 1 or week 2. When you're, I don't want to say warned, but when you're trying to prepare teachers for what they will expect. I actually had someone ask, why are we focusing so much on the what ifs? Like, I just want to get into the teaching part. I said, you'll understand after week 1. And after week 1, it was, I understand. Now, can we revisit some of those? You know, but that's the stuff that universities do a wonderful job at preparing, like pedagogy, like how to teach and what to do and the good teaching part. But the real conversations don't take place enough, and that's something that I focus on just as a principal, as a facilitator, as a trainer, and it is very beneficial once they see real life action, you know, the action.
Yeah, the article that I brought talks about that. It's a dialogue between a professor and a student, and the question is, am I preparing you to preparing or prepared to lead? And it's this dialogue between a second-year teacher who is deciding to leave, and she's in a high-need urban setting, frustrated by the system. Her heart is with kids and serving children, but she doesn't have the support, like we've talked about, that she needs to do what she believes in her heart is right for kids. And so the end of the article talks about how do we move forward in our teacher prep programs, what is needed, and one of the things that the authors point out is the fact that we need to be truthful about the settings that we're serving children in across the board, the changing faces of poverty and what that's like, and the demands that are very real for our teachers now, the assessments that we need to give to our students, but not the assessments that teachers are also being evaluated upon. It's huge. It's a total shift, and they come in with such great teacher hearts, feeling accountable for helping their students not only grow, but the whole mindset thing, to believe that they can grow and self-efficacy, and they are weighted down by that. Just it's huge. The second years, they're walking in and saying, I didn't cry yet, Kristen. I didn't cry yet. Good.
Yes.
It's okay if you do.
Right. Yeah,
good.
I saw some too.
Yeah.
Christina, follow it.
So I have been all over the board, and there's a few things. I think, even just to set the context, I'm a Reiki master teacher, and there's a few things that have come to the forefront for me in connecting that to my teaching practice. And if you don't know what Reiki is, it's energy work. It's very similar to, let's see, maybe like yoga or craniosacral reflexology. It's balancing the body's energetic system. And whoa, you're sneaking in on me. Can I talk right now? Just give me a minute. It's my child. Okay. So what I'm reflecting on is, and there's just so many things that have popped up in the last, I'd say even just few weeks, and with my experiences with my own children, but the kids coming in now are different energetically. And regardless of culture, I think that needs to be acknowledged so that the teachers aren't crying every day after school. And just in my own experience, I was teaching K through 8 Spanish at a Catholic school in Burlington, and I was just on the beginning of my energy work and learning, and I would go around and just put a little positive energy. And you can frame it any way you want. It could be prana, it could be chi, life force, it could be the Holy Spirit. It cuts across all, but it's positive life force energy. And I would go around and touch every kid's head, and then by the end of the day, I'd fall out sick. And I'm, what in the world? I'm trying to help these kids and give a little light and help their spirits. I was taking on all of their stuff. And the way that I even frame that is, when you're with a friend, if you don't know how to shield yourself and protect your energy, if you're with a friend who's always that bummer, who's always depressed, who's always, you see the phone ring and you don't even want to answer it because you know you will be exhausted. Our energy extends out around us, and if we get into that person's energy, they've sucked the life force out of us. I call them energy suckers. I like vampires. They need it to survive. But, these kids coming in have such a high frequency. So the average adult is like, 99.1, and the kids are 105.1 right now. And aligning those frequencies, but these kids are coming in and they're so wide open and compassionate and loving, and they give, but they're overwhelmed. This little guy, Christian, is a case in point. He has sensory perception disorders and sensory integration disorder. The world is too intense for him, but so many kids are like that right now. And you can look at it from the way we do as a normal society, or you can look at it from that energy perspective, where I need to teach him how to protect himself and shield himself. So when he gets into a large group, it's just this overload. And there's ways to do that. So I had this opportunity to teach a couple Montessori classes, 1st through 3rd grade, and the teachers let me come in and do a little energy workshop. So I came in and I taught the kids. We sat in a circle and taught them how to bring down that protective energy and to make a bubble. And the first bubble was, we played with it. The kids are crazy powerful. The first bubble was peace, and what did peace feel like? And each kid went, okay, then let's do happiness. And then they started giggling as they passed it from one kid to the next. We'd do love, and then the girls would, and the boys would blush, and so once they felt it and they got it, and the teachers were like, what is going on? And the teachers were in on it too, and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel that. Yes, you do feel that. So then I taught all the kids, okay, here's how to make a protective bubble around you, so that other people, so that if you're feeling there's too much and you're going crazy and you don't know what to do with yourself, and which would be like our kids with ADD, you need to just run or do something, put your bubble around yourself, and that will protect you. So we practiced that, they all got it. And then the other one was learning how to grow roots, like a tree, to ground your energy, especially when you have to do this on a regular basis. So they learn how to ground their energy. And we played with a few things, and then about a week later, I got all my little thank yous from this 1st through 3rd grade. And the one that sticks out is the little boy who said, thank you so much for teaching me Reiki. I made my bubble, and I had so much energy, and I ran so fast, but I grew my roots right before I hit the fence. But these kids are so, even my 17-year-old and my 16-year-old, seeing their journey as these super high frequency kids, and if I do not shield, especially my 15-year-old, or 15, 16 he's about to be, he gets depression because he's an empath and he's in with everybody every day, and his heart goes out to everybody, and this kid, and so he's a difficult one. But imagine your teachers are so empathic. Their hearts are going out to all their kids, and
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because we talk to teachers about compassion fatigue in our trauma training. But after a while, their compassion becomes fatigued and they're overwhelmed by the system and not getting that support. That their compassion and their empathy shuts down to where they get that silencing response, because they're feeling those symptoms and that drainage, that in order to protect themselves and their emotions, they shut down everybody else.
Well, I teach people how not to do that, and just to stick with it. But so anyway, what I've been trying to work on and what I've been finding are ways to help, several different things, but how do we actually teach our young kids resilience? I'm still in the process of searching these. I'm a Freire disciple, so everything that comes out of Freire and critical pedagogy and everything, that's where I'm at. But teaching kids resilience, I have some issues with this generation me that's occurring right now, the teens who have this sense of entitlement just because. Being somebody who teaches community leadership, I'll get these freshmen in and sophomores, and I'll spend an hour and a half on feedback for their paper, and they're offended that critiqued their paper instead of looking at it as, but they've been the pretty princess for so long.
Yeah.
I just have eye contact now.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I have, or they don't even read your feedback, and then they keep making the same mistakes in paper after paper, and then they don't understand why they're not.
I'd rather have them not read it than
Oh,
be
really?
pissed off.
Yeah.
That I would.
And you know what's interesting? I do think that's generational. I had a student the other day, because I teach in the grad program, who said, make sure that you give me all the feedback that you possibly can, and I won't be offended. I really want to learn from it. I mean, I think we have to.
You understand what feedback is?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's the deal.
And I think that when I get students